On this 4th of July weekend, while Americans celebrate their founders and their founding principles, it seems appropriate to recognize the birth of our own precious church as we observe our 85th year of ministry and mission. 85 years ago tomorrow, ground was broken on a barren spot at the corner of Chester Avenue and Adams Street in the virtual no man's land between Stewart Manor and Garden City. As you shall see, this church, like this country, was born in a time of challenge and turmoil, and the vision of our country's founding fathers and our church's founding fathers and mothers was the same: to survive and succeed in the name of the one the Declaration of Independence called the Supreme Judge of the world. This morning, as I recall the events that led us here today, I ask you to consider this verse from Romans 15:4. For whatever was written in former days, that is to say, in our own past, was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. Hope. Today's message isn't just about history. It is about hope, our hope for the future. And our foundation is not brick and mortar, but God Almighty Himself. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Tell me the old story, the ancient hymn goes. This is our story of labor and love, service and servant, family and faith, commitment and communion. Take pride in where we've been, who we are, and where, with faith in God, we can go together. The Presbyterian Church in Garden City has been the spiritual home for approximately 2,500 members in its 85-year history. As illustrated by the red, white, and blue of our nation's flag, we are truly blessed to be multicultural and multiracial. Look around and take joy in that. 3 of our current members entered our family more than 65 years ago. Adele Kiesel in 1941 and Bill Kiesel in 1944. Barbara McVeigh in 1949, when then 12-year-old Caitlin Harrison joined on May 15, 2004, she became the 4th generation from her family, following her mother Lisa in 1982, grandmother Barbara, and late grandparents Paul and Doris Stellwagen around 1940. Our church roll also includes members from the 1960s, Ruth Campisi, Terry Procopa, there you are, Terry Procopa, and Everett Vilander. Everett. And the 1970s, Muriel and Richard Druitz, Chris Campisi, and Christine Denoya. Our congregation began as a mission church of the New York Presbytery in 1929 due to the development of Western Nassau County. But we weren't alone. Our neighbors at Christ Episcopal Church, St. James Lutheran, and St. Anne's Roman Catholic Church all took root around this time. Thus, our seeds were planted to the dying strains of the Jazz Age and the opening bell of the Great Depression. 1929 also marked the first appearance of baby Jacqueline Bouvier in East Hampton, Grumman Aircraft on Long Island, the Empire State Building construction in Manhattan, Adelphi University in Garden City, Mother Teresa arriving in Calcutta that year, Popeye in the comics, All Quiet on the Western Front on bookshelves, Gerber baby food on grocery store shelves, as well as, in 1929, Jones Beach State Park, the Academy Awards, the Museum of Modern Art, and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It was an eventful year, to be sure. On June 9th of that year, our church started as a Sunday school class conducted by Miss Mary Kyle, a New York Presbyterian missionary. The site was 154 Salisbury Avenue, the home of the Reverend Mackintosh McLeod, who would soon become our first pastor. That address is now 64 Salisbury Avenue. Go knock on their door and tell them how important they are. That's the site of where our first church meeting took place. The first preaching service was led by the Reverend A.H. Griffith, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Queens Village, on the evening of July 29th, 1929, in a storefront on 84 Covert Avenue in Stuart Manor. This is what Covert Avenue looked like in 1926, when Stuart Manor was known as Sunrise Gardens. And this is an early view of our namesake village. The building next door to our storefront church housed the fire department in the front and the village offices in the rear. That covert location is now the CPA firm of Baldessari and Koster. The fledgling church developed rapidly in the fall and winter of 1929-1930. On October 23rd, 1929, the last day of American normalcy before the calamitous stock market crash began, the last day, the Women's Service League was organized. The Presbyterian women, as they became known, as well as the Thursday ladies, have been indispensable throughout our history, as exemplified by the untiring efforts of long-term President and much-missed Jean O'Brien. On November 3rd, 1929, Reverend McLeod, formerly of the Westminster Church in Brooklyn, became our first pastor. Meanwhile, the grim reaper that was the Great Depression began claiming its own. According to the official history of Stuart Manor, the village became known as Suicide Manor because of the, quote, 12 or more suicides that occurred in that period, a short period. The necessity of a center of worship could not have been greater. So on February 6th, 1930, the United Presbyterian Church of Stuart Manor was permanently organized. Stuart Manor was appropriate because our history began there, and when it was already an incorporated village. But then, the very next year, in 1931, we found ourselves officially in the village of Garden City, when the Western Property Owners Association was created. But as we shall see, Stuart Manor would remain part of our name until 1985. Records show that the first membership roll was established on April 20th, 1930, with 93 people. 2 months later, the church was incorporated with 91 members. The church needed a permanent home, a place where men, women, and children, in their respectful Sunday best, could put their faith in the Almighty when faith in the almighty dollar was plunging. So on July 6th, a groundbreaking ceremony for the sanctuary took place right above us. The $65,000 edifice, $910,000 today, was dedicated on December 14th, 1930. Here's how the Brooklyn Daily Eagle previewed the big event that morning. And note how the headline and dateline refer to Garden City without even mentioning the exact name of the church. Headline, "Will dedicate new church at Garden City." Dateline, Garden City, Long Island, December 13th. The Reverend Dr. R.A. Hutchinson of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, will officiate tomorrow afternoon at the new United Presbyterian Church here at Chester Avenue and Adams Street. The Reverend Mackintosh McLeod, pastor of the church, will assist in the service. For the past year, the church has been conducted in a storeroom on Covert Avenue with a fully organized Sunday school, women's league, men's club, and young people's society. The new structure of colonial architecture has a main auditorium and balcony providing seats for 350 and a basement hall, right where we are, of seating of 300 for recreational activities. Now, that's an overstatement of what fire laws allow now, of course. The new building will be open for inspection on the evenings of December 16th, 17th, and 18th. It was a big event locally, and an event worthy of an official proclamation, which is in the narthex of the church, often hidden when the doors are open. The United Presbyterian Church of Stewart Manor enjoyed its greatest growth and influence during the pastorate of the Reverend Dr. Kenneth Miller. He began his impressive 31-year tenure on February 21st, 1937, arriving from Pennsylvania and guiding the church through the end of the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, and the beginning of the Vietnam War. He was a firm but beloved leader, serving both our congregation and many ministerial organizations. During his service, the church added a pipe organ and chimes in 1948 and hosted in 1957 the 100th annual meeting of the New York Synod, of which he was the longtime stated clerk. Membership grew to more than 900. Wouldn't that be great if that was us today? Wow. 900 members. And it necessitated double services, an assistant pastor, a second manse, and in 1962, a $150,000 education week expansion. That's about $1.2 million today's money. That expansion increased the church's floor space by 75%. It was a busy and exciting time. It was probably a parking nightmare. Photo number 12 shows the cornerstone and construction site. The preparation for this event was no doubt distracted by the October Cuban Missile Crisis. So after that fretful moment passed, there must have been special joy and thanks to God when the ceremony took place on Veterans Day, November 11th, 1962. Another important leader of that period was Dr. Florence Wilson, who left an endowment in 1965 that still provides substantial support for our Christian education program. This vitally important tradition of generous philanthropy has been exemplified in recent years by members like the late Annette Schroeder and Bill Fuller, as well as the aforementioned Kiesels and Muriel Druitz, among others. And if time is money, words of gratitude will never equal the priceless contributions of Bill Doherty, our corporation president since 2005, or our former and much missed Adams Street neighbors, Stu and Wendy Boyson. Stu and Wendy, come home. Returning to our history, Dr. Miller was permanently succeeded by the Reverend James C. Roof on September 8th of the tumultuous year 1968. The Vietnam War raged. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, and America elected a president who would later be forced to resign. In the fall of 1969, our own assistant pastor, the Reverend Florence Headwall, became the first woman to be ordained in the Long Island Presbytery, a proud moment indeed in our church's history. In the years since, our congregation has had 5 more full-time pastors and 4 interims. Our full-time pastors were the Reverend Robert Mogi, who arrived in 1971, the Reverend Charles Curitan in 1973, the Reverend Steve Simpson in 1985, the Reverend Robert Close in 1999, and of course our current pastor, the Reverend Wanda Lowry Hughes, in 2002. Notable among the interims was the Reverend Dr. Theodore Lilly on the left, who served 3 different terms following Dr. Miller, Reverend Roof, and Reverend Mogi, and the Reverend Donna Prickett in the center, who followed Reverend Curitan. The third person in this photo from our 60th anniversary in 1990 was the Reverend Lawrence McCulloch, a former assistant pastor to Dr. Miller. This photograph from our 75th anniversary shows Pastor Wanda with 2 other gifted and beloved interims, the Reverend Ed Myers, who succeeded Reverend Close, and the Reverend John Evans, who followed Reverend Simpson. Now here are some other significant highlights from our past. We celebrated our 25th anniversary in the heady days of 1955 with a dinner at the Garden City Hotel, a sumptuous location probably beyond our means today. Consider these affluent numbers from 60 years ago. The Sabbath school alone had a staff of 32 and pupil enrollment of 343. We observed the 50th anniversary in 1979, and the following year we began sponsoring a family from Vietnam. On October 20th, 1985, the congregation voted to change its name from the United Presbyterian Church of Stewart Manor to the Presbyterian Church in Garden City, designating at last its true location. I'd been a member for 2 years at that time, and it was not a unanimous vote. There were a lot of folks who wanted to keep the name the way it was, the way it had been, and the way they remembered. For several years, beginning in May 1989, various members of our congregation volunteered at a homeless shelter in Hempstead. From July 1989 through December 2004, we shared our facilities with the Korean Church of Long Island. At the worship service for our 60th anniversary in May 1990, Reverend Simpson preached a positive message that is as true today as it was then. This ain't the Titanic. That was his title. 2 months later, Reverend Simpson took another form of transportation, went to Scotland for a month-long pastor exchange with the Reverend A.M. Roger from Newton Murn, Scotland, near Glasgow. Many of us recall our most exuberant anniversary, the 75th. Boy, does time fly, 10 years ago, which was a year-long June 2004 to June 2005 extravaganza that included a barbecue, a concert, an antique car show, a Presbyterian women's dinner, a February Sunday service, an Italian luncheon, and a grand gala weekend with a Friday night concert, Saturday night dinner dance at the Hempstead Country Club, and a Sunday service and luncheon. A year's worth of memorable partying. It was terrific. Now, in conclusion, here are some highlights that have occurred more recently during Pastor Wanda's tenure, which began on December 1st, 2002. March 2003, she created the transformation team to examine all aspects of church life and develop specific recommendations for Christian renewal and revival. Many of those we are still ticking off. We're still doing. September 2004, Carol Dort became our choir director and organist and began restoring and rescoring the church's music program. 2005, the Club 413 began, leading to increased youth participation in worship and domestic and international mission trips such as the one they are on this weekend. Kelly Reeves, Peter Cianciato, Joseph Watson, Zach Naglieri, and Renee Watson have all been delegates to the Youth Triennium. Under Pastor Wanda's loving influence, We have seen our young people grow in confidence, wisdom, and faith. We are blessed by it. The church created in March 2007 the Society of Angels to honor people who include the church in their bequest and planned giving. If you haven't already, give it some thought. June 2006 to June 2014, the church hosted a week-long vacation Bible school, initially under the direction of Linda Chinzinski and then Mary Lou McCann. In November 2008, the church created the Magi Society to honor those people who have generously provided funding for specific church gifts above and beyond their stewardship pledge. I urge you again, give it consideration. June 7, 2009 to June 20, 2010, the church observed its 80th anniversary by asking members to take part in an 80 for 80 campaign, 80 acts of service or participation through donating time, talent, or treasure. Those purposes, that mission can continue and should continue for as long as we are here. 2010 to 2014, the church operated a year-long mission program for a class of immigrant Central American students at Westbury's Powell's Lane School. One of my favorite memories was watching Lois DeGraff interact with those fun-loving kids. March 2012, the church became the host location for our Precious Angels Daycare Center and its 5 days per week operation. June 2012, Pastor Wanda served as a delegate to the Presbyterian General Assembly in Pittsburgh. June 2013 to August 2014, the church served as host location for the Portledge Driving School. In June 2014, and I say this with great humility, only to as a tribute to the church where I have been privileged to be a member since 1983, I also got to serve as a delegate to the Presbyterian General Assembly in Detroit, and later that year was selected to be the Long Island Presbytery moderator in 2017. So they wanted 3 years to change their mind. So we'll see if I still make the cut in 2017. So here we are today. That's been our journey. 85 years after the ground was broken for this very building. Like those brave patriots of 1776 and the noble women who supported them, we know that we shall continue in the Declaration's words through our, quote, firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. May divine providence always be with us. I also recall the prophetic words of the 25th anniversary celebrants in 1955. This is what they proclaimed in their official program for that event. What the church has done and is doing, it will continue to do, for each year sees it becoming larger and stronger in all of the ways of service. May that joyful optimism guide us as well. Happy anniversary, everyone. And now let us sing God of Our Life as found on the insert. And you want to go through it once before we sing?